as everybody listening knows, the football season ain't done before the weekend's Champions League final, PSG versus Inter, of course. And you mentioned Inter a moment or two ago, Nicky, and hinted that there might be a managerial vacancy there, which seems, somewhat remarkable given Simone Inzaghi's tenure at the club. However, before we get into that, may I ask the obvious question, and we will talk about PSG as well. The obvious question is it now or never for this Inter side?
It's almost as if you've heard I might have a piece coming up for The Guardian this week asking that question. Yes, I think it is for at least part of the team, right? Francesco Acerbi is 37 years old. Henrik Mkhitaryan is 36 years old. Matteo Darmian probably won't start, although he did start 2 years ago in the final against Man City. He's 35 years old, I think. Jan Sommer is 36 years old. This is not a young group of players, and there's plenty more in that team who are hovering around 30. I think Çalhanoğlu's 31, which, look, 31, definitely you've still got enough time to have another go. And maybe even in theory you do at 37, because who knows, they could go back again next year. But I think there's definitely an awareness with this team that it's really hard to get to a Champions League final. They did it 2 years ago. They've done it again, which makes it look easy, but they know exactly how easy it isn't because they've gone through the games and they've walked the walk. And they've got a group that has largely stayed together since Istanbul. They haven't lost a lot of starters from that group, and they've been, well, I was going to say they've been fortunate, but they've done incredible business, frankly, to manage to mitigate the players who did leave, the likes of Edin Dzeko going, who was huge in that run, and then you get Marcus Thuram in, who's just a better foil still to Lautaro Martinez. There is a window, there is a moment here that may not endure, and I think that's amplified by the thing I hinted at in the last section, which is reports that Simone Inzaghi might not be here next season. There's been strong reports of interest from Saudi Arabia, which personally I would find just crushing if he walks away from European football at this moment, when I think he absolutely, whether he stays at Inter or goes somewhere else, deserves to be coaching a top Champions League team, because I think he's at that level. But I think there is absolutely, for sure for some players more than others, but for everyone in this Inter team, a very keen awareness that we've got a big chance right now. We've done a lot of hard work. I won't say the hard work, because beating PSG is incredibly hard work, but we've done a lot of hard work by beating Bayern Munich, Barcelona, and then some teams in the group stage as well, like Arsenal. We might not manage this again, so let's take full advantage of this moment while we have it.
It does feel like a bit of a 3-year cycle, doesn't it, Nicky? Because I think not just the age of the players, but as you say, they're the better team really for most of the final in 2023. It's a real sore point that they didn't get past that Atletico Madrid last year in the last 16, and they felt they had a real crack at it, and Inzaghi felt they had a real chance to go deep in it again. And, they've been, I think it's fair to say, quietly confident throughout this season that they can get themselves into this sort of advanced position. And you can really see that belief in that there were various points, I think, particularly in the quarterfinals and the semi-finals against Bayern and Barcelona, where it felt like they were on the end of a bit of a kicking, and they managed to hang on. And if you're talking about cup competitions being about resolve and hanging in there and not always the best team, I think that's a huge part of it as well. I mean, the big question for Inter this season, and with all credit to Napoli, Inter will look back at this season and think the league should be ours. I don't think there's any doubt about that, because they've got the best squad, the best team in the division. They didn't manage to get it done. A huge part of that was them not being able to master the big games. And yet, in the Champions League, that's exactly what they've done for the last couple of rounds. Like, no excuses. Being able to ride out the rough bits. There's almost a little bit of Atletico Madrid to them, like prime Atletico Madrid in the Champions League, I think, because we think of them as, and certainly up until the quarterfinals, like defensively perfect, really, at least statistically. And then they start leaking a bit more, but they become really good at hanging on and then making the most of their bits in the game, which is exactly what they did against Bayern, which is exactly what they did against Barcelona. When they had a window, they jumped through it. And that's really impressive. I like you, wonder if you're Inzaghi and you're trying to sell yourself this move to Saudi, and honestly, it's so much money, I can understand why it would make you more than blink. We're talking about over 3 times his current Inter salary. I think it might be over 4 times his current Inter salary, actually, if I can correct myself. It's I guess you would say to yourself, yeah, maybe we're at the end of a cycle, and maybe someone else should take it on from there. Maybe that's how you sell it to yourself. Like you, I think it would be sad if he moved on. But I guess, Dotton, the interesting thing is that these two teams, in terms of age, are like completely different ends of the spectrum. Like you said at the top, it might feel that it's like win or go home for Inter, but it isn't for PSG. Obviously, that won't diminish their desire to win, but they're not in the same boat.
But whether they win or not, this season has got to be seen as a huge season, hasn't it, for Luis Enrique? Given the difficult start he had at PSG, actually, they seem to have done everything that they needed to do this season, including winning their domestic league, which perhaps doesn't come as a surprise to anybody, but you still got to win it.
You're right, and I think that they've managed to, sort of tick off those bits at half tilt. I mean, look, it's difficult because Serie A is like much more competitive than Liga, and that's not disputable in any way, shape, or form. But if you look at that, and you look at the Coupe de France last season, they're double winners. We should add, and they're 1 game away from the treble. When they beat Reims last weekend, which was such a weird cup final, because Reims are halfway between 2 legs of a relegation playoff. So they've not really got their minds on it either. And you get to the end of the game, and both sets of players are not talking about the cup final that they've just played, which is really fascinating and really unusual. But the fact that they still managed to get it done, that Kvaratskhelia pulled out at the last minute because he wasn't well, and Barcola steps in and scores a couple of goals in the first half and puts PSG on top of the game. Now, I don't think that will be enough to get him a start in this final, but it does show you the sort of depth they have and the readiness of those players. If to go back to your point, Dotton, about Luis Enrique, I think is a really key point to make, because if we're talking about vindication of characters in this run into the European football season, there can be few greater vindications than the one that Luis Enrique has enjoyed this season, because people questioned whether PSG were good enough in the Champions League. In the second half of the season, he's put that argument to bed. I questioned whether they should sign Kvaratskhelia rather than a proper centre forward. That question's been totally put to bed. He's been a massive
Very
hit,
much
and
so.
it's helped them be very fluid. It's helped them be phenomenal off the ball, which has made them the best team in this competition for the second half of it. And I think when you look at the inherited problems from a very different culture, a star-led culture that Luis Enrique inherited, for him to get to this point in less than 3 years, okay, we can talk about the resources, the money, etc., etc. But actually, some of the key signings have not been about that. They're players who other clubs could have afforded, like Barcola, like Desiree Doué, who's been phenomenal this season. And these are players who will continue to be like even better for them in seasons to come. I think it's, as Luis Enrique has been given increasing power at PSG, a little bit like Mikel Arteta has at Arsenal, actually. They can have like no regrets over that as a club. It's worked out brilliantly well.
Does all of this make them favourites, Nicky, for the Champions League? Because, and added to that, I'm not forgetting that you said earlier on that, it's been a season of many, many games for Inter, and arguably, you would think PSG has had a slightly easier season.
I don't know if that's what makes them the favourites. I think they are the favourites. I think they're the favourites, as boring as this is, because in 2025, so talking about the calendar year, I think they've just been the best team in the world. I just do. I think that watching them play, I think the levels they perform at, the way they've navigated their Champions League knockout games has a certain higher degree of certainty, actually, than the way Inter have. Inter have been incredibly compelling because at times it's felt a bit edge of your seat balmy, right? It's felt like this is just wild football that's happening, especially, of course, the semi-final. And that's why it was one of the most entertaining two-legged ties I've ever watched, like the one against Barcelona, but even the one against Bayern Munich, right? They take the lead, they lose the lead, they take it back again, they lose it again at home. The thing that's made Inter compelling is that, and this is where we talk about the maturity and things that they talk about. Certainly, this is the story they're telling as players and coaches. They talk about having gained this maturity from the run 2 years ago, and it feels like there has certainly been an ability to navigate big, scary moments in ties from Inter. And sometimes I wonder if that's just us as journalists and them as players seeing the result and writing the story to fit it, because in the end, they are outperforming their XG, right, by a lot in the knockout stage of this tournament. So is it just a little bit of chance? Well, of course it is. It's football. Like, sometimes the ball goes in, sometimes it doesn't, right? People hit the post in those ties several times. Woodwork was hit between the games against Bayern and Barcelona. So who knows how easily things could have gone differently. But there's something more controlled to PSG. It's something that feels maybe a little bit more like it's approaching the natural end of development this season, the way they've gone, because they also have got, as I say, a lot better through this season, and there's things that kind of just make sense in that. There is Enrique dropping Dembele and Dembele having that response to it. There is signing a player like Kvaratskhelia in the middle of the season who does something very specific for them, who is absolutely an Enrique player in the way that he tracks back and serves the team, but who also has just created a different angle of attack and a different means of attack, because he's such a unique player in the way that he dribbles, and that combination of extremely close, hard to dispossess control, which oddly I think that the close control thing is kind of an underpinning thread of that whole team, because you look at that midfield and with Vitinha and Neves, and you just think, how do you get the ball off them ever? It's such a nightmare getting the ball off PSG when they have it. So they've built an identity that's absolutely arrowing towards something. And I sort of feel, if I go player for player through the teams, and I think, which of these two teams do I have a more confidence? And I'm not talking about a wide margin. I'm not suggesting for a second I think Inter are miles behind, because I don't. But I think when I do that, I look at it and I go, okay, I think PSG are better. I think they are. But equally, I think Inter have this little bit of feeling within themselves that this is destiny now, that Francesco Acerbi scores in the 92nd minute because he's just supposed to, because that's just what's meant to happen, right? This is where this team is going. And I think that is real. I think that footballers are, without completely generalizing, but they can be a wildly superstitious bunch. They can be a bunch that absolutely buy into these stories of moments and fate and destiny. And I think that Inter do believe their destiny right now. And I'm sure that PSG do as well. But I think that that's almost the clash in my head with this final, is one team that I think is slightly better and one team that just has the perfect story that we were here 2 years ago, we've built up to this, and now is our time.
Is it ditto Dotson for you, Andy?
I think PSG by a whisker as well. I just think we can focus so much on the aesthetic excellence of PSG and that sort of intransigence of Inter, that we can overlook that PSG have that side to them as well. You know, there've been a couple of games when they've been really under the pump. I think you look at the first bit of the second leg against Arsenal in Paris. I think you look at the away game against Aston Villa. Games you wouldn't have expected Donnarumma to have to bring out his A game as much as he has, but he has. You know, he's been one of the players. He's been the best goalkeeper in this tournament.
Yeah,
whether he's the
Sommer
best,
might be number two. Like, there's not much between them, right? Like that's.
Yeah. I mean, whether like Donnarumma is even the best goalkeeper for what Luis Enrique wants going forward is a question mark. But he has been the best goalkeeper in this tournament, I think, because he's made a massive impact at key moments. So I think their ability to ride out the tough bits as well. Look, I hope both of them have each other under the pump at various stages, and we have to have Sommer and Donnarumma bring out their A games. That would mean it would have been a brilliant final. And I'm quite optimistic that it really will be a memorable final as well.